In most theft stories we hear about, the thief is usually experienced or has a criminal record. But today, we're going to talk about a woman who, with the help of her friend, pulled off a successful heist, stealing an armored truck containing over $3 million, and astonishingly succeeded by disguising herself as an old woman in a brilliant way, escaping without raising any suspicion. This story is thrilling, with captivating events and, most importantly, an unpredictable ending. So, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Focus closely, follow the events, and stay tuned for the full story. Enjoy the video. It all began in 1972 when a girl named Heather Catherine Schiff was born in Buffalo, New York. Heather was born to a family consisting of a mother and father and had one brother. They lived together in a house, and Heather was the result of an illegitimate relationship during her parents' school years. When their parents found out her mother was pregnant, they were pressured into marriage, which lasted until Heather was about 3 years old. At that point, her mother told her father she wanted a divorce and wanted to live a free life, so she even gave him custody of the child. Imagine, Heather was only 3 years old, and she was already in desperate need of care. Her father couldn't manage alone. So he eventually met a woman named Cindy, whom he married, with the condition that she would take care of Heather. Heather, as a child, needed a woman more than a man to take care of her. Cindy accepted, but as Heather grew older, she noticed that Cindy always treated her harshly and without affection, and Heather felt that Cindy didn't love her and was only taking care of her out of obligation. In elementary school, Cindy would insult her, calling her a failure, and reminded her that her mother abandoned her, while Heather's father, on the other hand, was more concerned with drinking and using substances than caring for her. This lack of love at home made Heather's relationship with her family very cold, but she remained focused on her studies, eventually graduating and moving to Las Vegas. She started working as a nurse, specializing in cancer patient care. In 1993, Heather met a man named Roberto Solis, who was 48 years old at the time, and they struck up a conversation, and over time, their relationship grew stronger. And one day, Roberto asked Heather if she had ever tried drugs, to which she replied no. He convinced her to try it, and soon she was hooked, using drugs daily. Roberto knew that once she was addicted, she would be dependent on him for her supply, keeping her under his control. Eventually, Heather lost her job due to her addiction and was left with nothing. Roberto, seeing her in this vulnerable state, grew more attached to her and took control of her life, and they lived together, and he continued to manipulate her, using her love for him to keep her from leaving. Roberto had a criminal past, having committed several armored car robberies and even murder. He was born in Nicaragua in 1945 and started his life of crime at a young age. In 1969, while attempting to rob an armored truck, he shot and killed a guard, leading to his arrest and a life sentence in prison. However, in 1992, he was released on parole after gaining a following as a poet in prison, writing books and gaining the support of people outside. And after his release, he met Heather, and they began their relationship. Despite her tough life, Heather was still trying to keep it together, but Roberto slowly dragged her deeper into his world. Eventually, Roberto ran out of money and was wanted by the FBI due to his criminal activities, so they needed a large sum of money to escape and live comfortably. Roberto suggested that Heather get a job as a security officer at a money transport company, and Heather, not knowing what she was getting into, agreed, securing a position as a driver for an armored truck company named Loomis. The company had several warehouses, one of which was in Las Vegas, where large sums of money were stored, typically between $30 and $50 million. When Heather applied for the job, they asked her if she had any experience, to which she truthfully replied that it was her first time, but the company was desperate to hire a specific number of female employees. So they accepted her. Despite her lack of experience, they gave her an armored truck to drive, even though she had only gotten her driver's license a few months earlier. Heather struggled with the job, often making mistakes while driving. Her colleagues complained that she was a terrible driver who frequently caused accidents and even ignored traffic signals. Despite this, she managed to keep her job because her boss was charmed by her and couldn't bring himself to fire her. The crew on the armored truck consisted of 3 people: Heather, the driver, and 2 other employees who handled the loading and unloading of money at various locations, including casinos and ATMs. As Heather continued working at the company, Roberto began questioning her about the procedures, asking where the money was picked up, where it was dropped off, and when the truck was most full of cash. Heather, unaware of his intentions, answered all his questions. Eventually, Roberto proposed a plan to steal the money, and Heather, deeply attached to him, agreed to go along, believing it would secure their future. They decided to execute the heist on October 1st, 1993, a Friday. The plan was for Heather to drop off her coworkers at their first stop, Circus Circus, a hotel and casino complex with several ATMs. The employees would be occupied, allowing Heather to drive off with the truck. Since the crew was used to her getting lost, they wouldn't immediately suspect anything, giving her enough time to carry out the heist without arousing suspicion. Before the heist, Roberto and Heather made careful preparations. They rented a storage unit where they planned to hide the truck after the robbery, making sure it looked like an auto repair shop to avoid suspicion. Heather was nervous, fearing something might go wrong, but Roberto reassured her, telling her to follow his instructions. They mapped out routes, knowing they had only an hour to disappear without a trace. After stealing the truck, they planned to transfer the money into a regular car, leaving the truck in the storage unit. They would then ship the money in boxes to Miami and fly out of Las Vegas on a private plane that Roberto arranged. Knowing Heather would be a wanted fugitive, Roberto instructed her to disguise herself as an elderly woman, complete with a wig, glasses, and makeup to alter her appearance. On the day of the heist, October 1st, 1993, Heather went to work as usual. Roberto had everything ready for the operation. After the truck was loaded with about $4.6 million, they headed to their first stop, Circus Circus. Heather dropped off her co-workers who took a smaller amount of money with them, and then sped off to the storage unit where Roberto was waiting. The employees, thinking she got lost, only realized something was wrong after some time. By then, Heather had already reached the storage unit, parking the truck inside without anyone noticing. Roberto opened the truck and saw the money, totaling $3.1 million, all in $20 and $50 bills. They quickly packed the cash into boxes and loaded them into their car, while Heather changed out of her uniform into her elderly woman disguise. Dressed in formal attire, Roberto joined her, and they drove away, heading to the post office. Heather hid in the car while Roberto mailed the boxes. On their way to the airport, they could hear helicopters and police sirens searching for them, making their escape more nerve-wracking. They reached the private airport, where a plane was waiting to take them to Colorado. Roberto chose Colorado because it was about 700 miles from Miami, where they planned to retrieve the money, hoping the FBI wouldn't search their due to the distance. When they arrived at the airport, Roberto pushed Heather in a wheelchair to maintain her disguise as a frail old woman, and they boarded the plane and flew out of Las Vegas, successfully escaping. Meanwhile, the FBI began investigating the case, starting with the employees Heather worked with and those at Circus Circus. They suspected everyone, but after thorough questioning, they realized no one else was involved in the heist. The FBI began to consider that either Heather had stolen the truck or had been kidnapped by robbers. To find out what had happened, they distributed the truck's license plate number to all patrols in Las Vegas, hoping to locate it. They also went to Heather's house, where she lived with Roberto. When they arrived, the door was locked, and they received no response, so they broke in, finding strange items related to witchcraft and books on travel. Inside the closet, they found a shirt from Loomis, the company Heather worked for, and began to suspect her involvement in the heist. The FBI continued to investigate, searching for fingerprints and eventually discovering that Heather and Roberto had been close for a long time. They were sure Roberto knew her whereabouts, but when they tried to track him down, they found that he had disappeared as well. Remembering that Roberto had previously attempted a similar robbery, they connected the dots. The FBI connected the dots and concluded that Roberto had either coerced Heather into the heist or they had collaborated. They launched a manhunt for Roberto as well. They offered a $25,000 reward, which later increased to $300,000 for any information leading to the capture of Heather and Roberto. They also offered a 10% reward for any recovered money. Meanwhile, Roberto and Heather had arrived in Colorado and checked into a hotel. In the hotel, Roberto had prepared a new outfit for Heather to change into quickly. After changing, they left the hotel and caught a train to New Orleans, about 1,700 miles from Las Vegas. From there, they traveled to Miami, making a long detour to throw off any potential pursuers. After 2 days of travel, they arrived in Miami and checked into a hotel. Roberto went to pick up the money they had shipped and brought it back in large suitcases. Meanwhile, the FBI, who had been investigating Heather's disappearance, contacted her father and asked him to come in for a meeting. He was shocked, having no idea what his daughter had done, as she had been out of touch with her family. The FBI informed Heather's father that she had stolen an armored truck containing over $3 million and was now missing. Her father was stunned and told them he had little contact with his daughter. He explained that he knew nothing of her current life. As the case gained more attention in Las Vegas, the FBI received a tip from the owner of the storage unit where Heather and Roberto had hidden the truck. The owner told them that a couple had rented the unit under the guise of using it as an auto repair shop. The FBI rushed to the storage unit and found the truck inside, completely emptied of its contents, confirming their suspicions. They took fingerprints from the truck, confirming that they belonged to Heather and Roberto. For 12 days, Heather and Roberto stayed hidden in the hotel, with Roberto only leaving to get supplies. During this time, Roberto met another woman named Marlene, to whom he revealed the entire story of the heist. Marlene, unaware of the danger, helped them by bringing anything they needed from outside, inadvertently aiding two wanted fugitives. However, Heather began to notice that Roberto was giving more attention to Marlene than to her, which made her suspicious and uncomfortable. She tried to confront Roberto about it, but he dismissed her concerns, brushing them off with sweet talk. Meanwhile, the FBI continued their investigation, realizing that the large amount of money stolen would require them to use suitcases or packages to transport it. They contacted various shipping companies. After some investigation, the FBI discovered that a man matching Roberto's description had indeed sent several packages from Las Vegas to Miami. They also learned that the packages had been delivered to a hotel in Miami, leading them to intensify their search in the area. Roberto, sensing that they might soon be discovered, decided it was time to change locations. After a month on the run, he and Marlene flew to St. Martin, leaving Heather behind. Roberto and Marlene rented a house in St. Martin, where they planned to lay low for a while. After settling in, Roberto contacted Heather and instructed her to travel to St. Martin using the forged passport he had prepared for her earlier. Heather, unaware of Roberto's growing relationship with Marlene, followed his instructions and flew to St. Martin. Once there, she reunited with Roberto, but soon noticed that Marlene was still in the picture. This made her increasingly uncomfortable and suspicious. Despite her concerns, Heather continued to stay with Roberto, but after a while, Marlene decided to return to Miami, leaving Heather and Roberto alone again. During this time, Heather started to feel uneasy, especially when she discovered that she was pregnant. The realization that she was carrying Roberto's child brought her a mix of fear and excitement, but also uncertainty about her future. By 1994, 8 months after the heist, Heather and Roberto decided to leave St. Martin and move to Amsterdam, Netherlands, where they hoped to start a new life. They took with them enough money to last for a while, leaving the rest of the stolen cash hidden in St. Martin. Once in Amsterdam, Heather gave birth to a son, whom they named Emilio. The birth of her child brought Heather a sense of responsibility and the desire for stability. Despite her efforts to create a new life, Roberto began to distance himself from Heather, frequently returning to St. Martin under the pretense of taking care of business. Heather soon discovered that Roberto was using her as a pawn to get the money and had no real intention of building a life with her. Devastated by this betrayal, Heather felt foolish for trusting him and for executing the heist. With her savings dwindling, she sought a legitimate job. Eventually, Heather found work in various places and began to stabilize her life. She also obtained new passports for herself and her son, valid until September 21, 2005, with the help of a document forger. Her main priority became raising Emilio and ensuring he had a normal life, different from the chaotic one she had experienced. Despite her criminal past, she focused on being a good mother and keeping a low profile to avoid further trouble. Over time, she met and married a man who genuinely loved her and cared for her son. Heather's new husband was unaware of her past, and they lived peacefully together, with Heather keeping her secret buried. However, she was always haunted by the fear of being caught, especially as she continued to see her name on lists of America's most wanted fugitives. The constant anxiety took a toll on her, and her husband and son noticed her unease. After years of living in fear, Heather finally confessed the truth to her husband, telling him about the heist, Roberto's betrayal, and her life on the run. The revelation strained their marriage, but they tried to make it work for the sake of their son. As the expiration date of their passports approached, Heather faced a difficult decision. Should she renew their identities and continue hiding, or should she turn herself in and face the consequences? After much soul-searching, Heather decided it was time to stop running and make things right. Despite having evaded capture for 12 years, she knew she could never truly be at peace unless she faced her past. Heather contacted a lawyer in the United States named Bob and told him that she was Heather Catherine Schiff, a fugitive wanted for stealing an armored truck 12 years ago. She explained that she wanted to surrender, but had one condition. Her condition was that her son must be allowed to live in the United States and obtain citizenship so that she could be with him after serving her sentence. Bob, eager to take on the case, agreed to help Heather negotiate the terms of her surrender, seeing an opportunity to gain fame and reward. Bob's main goal was to secure the $2 million reward that had been offered for information leading to Heather's capture, as well as the satisfaction of helping her. He advised Heather to return to the United States and turn herself in voluntarily, explaining that doing so would likely reduce her sentence. Traveling back to the U.S. was risky for Heather, especially given the heightened security measures after 9/11s, but she was determined to go through with it. Fortunately, Her forged passport went unnoticed, and she safely entered the country. Heather's return made headlines, with the media buzzing about the fugitive.
$3 million from an armored car back in 1993. Police say she drove away from Circus Circus in a Loomis truck full of cash. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Channel 8 Eyewitness News was on top of that story when it happened 12 years ago. We're the only Las Vegas station there for
her surrender shocked her family, who had no idea what she had been through. When asked by authorities why she chose to turn herself in after so many years, Heather explained that she had always known she would have to face justice for her crime, and she was ready to do so now. With Bob's help, she and her lawyer used the argument that Roberto was the mastermind behind the heist to reduce her sentence, painting her as a victim of his manipulation. Heather testified that Roberto had manipulated her into committing the crime, and that she had never intended to go through with the heist, but felt pressured by him. The court believed her story and ruled that Roberto was the primary culprit, while Heather had been merely a pawn in his plan. Although Heather had initially faced the possibility of 25 years in prison, the judge sentenced her to just 5 years due to her cooperation. After serving her sentence, Heather was released and returned to her life as a nurse, caring for cancer patients once again. Although she was free, the consequences of her actions still followed her, as she was required to make restitution payments for the money she and Roberto had stolen. These payments would likely continue for the rest of her life, ensuring she could never fully escape the shadow of her past. Her son Emilio chose to live in the Netherlands. Emilio visited his mother frequently, maintaining a close relationship despite the distance. As for Roberto, his whereabouts remain unknown to this day. If he is still alive, no one knows where he might be. The money he took from St. Martin has never been recovered, leaving many to speculate about what became of him. Heather's story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of crime and the impact that a single decision can have on an entire life. Despite the pain and regret, Heather found some measure of redemption by facing her past and striving to build a better future. She worked hard to provide a stable life for her son, ensuring that he would not follow in her footsteps. Heather's life after prison was far from easy, but she was determined to make amends for her past. She continued to work as a nurse, dedicating herself to helping others and slowly rebuilding her life, one day at a time. Heather remained under the watchful eye of the authorities due to her ongoing restitution payments, but she was thankful for the chance to live freely again. The media eventually moved on from her story, allowing her to live in relative peace. She knew she could never fully escape her past, but she was committed to making the most of her second chance. Heather's journey is a reminder that, no matter how far you run, you cannot outrun your own conscience. And so, we reach the end of our story. Heather's tale is one of crime, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. And if you're interested in another intriguing tale, consider watching the story of the Korean teenagers involved in blackmail, data theft, and extortion. It's a bizarre case full of twists and turns, with an ending no one could have predicted. See you in the next video. Peace out.